Hello, and welcome back to the Ship of Thesis and our Crusader Kings 3 tutorial series. We find ourselves now at a precipice with this episode. So far, we've taken you in this tutorial series through how governments work, how de jure and de facto works, we've explained what claims are, how successions are followed, and we've even talked about educating your children, and maybe even doing some genetic modification so that you can end up with your own master race dominating the world. And the key point that I mentioned there for segue purposes is dominating the world. This episode, we are finally going to talk about warfare, which is a topic I'm sure many of you are very excited to learn. So I'm going to take a similar format that I did with the eugenics videos with this, in that I'm going to give you a 900 miles an hour overview of how warfare works in this video. So it's going to be a quick, focused video on how warfare from a very high level works, and then there will be some previous or following videos rather that will go and explain in much more depth about how battles work, how to optimize your army, how sieges work, and all of that good stuff. Anyway, enough about future videos. Let's talk about the content of this video, shall we? Let's get on with learning about warfare. Okay, so there's actually a really cheeky reason as to why I started this video giving you a recap of what we've already learnt in this series, and that's because in order to discuss warfare, we're going to first need to talk about claims, and I have already done a video on claims, so I'm going to cheekily plug that in the top right of this video so you can go back and watch that if you haven't already done so. But for now, and for the sake of brevity, you need a reason to justify your war, a casus belli, if you will, and as Clausewitz said, war is a continuation of politics by other means. If you remember that this is a character-driven game, I am not actually declaring war on Alec if, as Petty King Murchad here, MacDonchad of Munster, I decide I want to expand my territory, which is currently nearly all of Ireland, right? Maybe I decided I want these last few territories. I wouldn't actually declare war on the county itself, or the earldom as it's currently called. I would actually declare war on the character who holds it, and I need a trumped up reason to do that first, either because I legitimately owned it before, or maybe I'm just going to say that I owned it. So I'm just going to right click on him, and like I said, it's an extension of politics, and therefore it's a diplomatic action to declare war. Right clicking on the character that you need to declare war on, and then declaring war will give you the declare war screen, and we're going to kind of go through this screen first and explain what it all means, because it does a pretty good job of telling you what you will and won't get out of declaring war. Okay, so to unpack this, basically you're given a list of things to consider as part of this war. The first and most important one to look at when you're about to declare a war is what allies have you got, and perhaps more importantly, what allies have they got. Right now, this guy's a nobody, and therefore he has no friends, but we actually have the King of Norway as an ally, and the reason for that is because we are married to his daughter. So she is the daughter of the King of Norway, and if we have a look at his military strength, he's pretty strong. He's pretty strong indeed. So he would be very useful as an ally if this guy were anything other than, just a like petty little earl. As it stands, we can probably take this guy by ourselves, but let's select one of, in fact, the only claim that we have. Ignore the debug war. That's purely because I'm in debug mode to make making these videos easier. Obviously, if you're playing the game properly, you won't have that. Right now, we don't actually have a claim on Alec here. So we can only use the claim that we have for one of the people in our court. Who is this guy? If we click on him, we can find out he's just a courtier, and he just so happens to have a claim on the earldom of Alec. But we could press the claim on his behalf. Now, as I've said, I have done a video on claims before, so if you want to understand how claims work, by all means, go back and watch that. But for now, just know that we're going to press this war on his behalf. And if we actually click this little arrow here, it gives us all the information about what will happen in the event that we press this war, or press this claim. So basically, he would become our vassal. He would gain this earldom. He'd also gain all of the bishoprics and cities. So if we zoom in, you can see there are multiple holdings that make up this county. The main one that we're actually interested in is the barony, because that's the one that the count has to hold, because it's the top level holding for this county. So really, if you want to fight over this, the earldom, as it's called in Ireland, is the thing that you're interested in. We would get a favour hook on this guy and a bunch of other things about fame. I'm not going to go too much into detail. This is basically what happens if we win, and you can see there are 3 little buttons here that show us the different kind of outcomes of a war. Enforced demands is the default because, well, you're declaring war, so you're kind of interested in what you'll get if you're successful. There's also white peace, which basically means both sides kind of agree to give up, and they each keep what they already had. And then there's also surrender, which is you basically realize that you've bitten off more than you can chew and you need to give this war up. And each of these, if you read through, shows what's going to happen. So obviously, if we win, this guy would get this territory and he would become our vassal. If we lose, he would lose his claim on this territory and we wouldn't gain this either, and we'd end up having to pay a load of gold to Earl Aid. Like I said, you can read this for yourself. It gives you a quick breakdown, and it's a very good way of you knowing what you're going to get out of any war. Right now, because we can see his portrait and because we only have the claim for him, we can't actually gain this territory for ourselves. If you look down the bottom, it does give us a quick breakdown of the kind of comparative strength of us versus our opponent. You can see that they are currently vastly inferior. This little blue flag is alliances. They have no alliances. So they're no troops versus our massive 1,644 levy and our 9 knights to their 5, I think they have. Yeah, so we almost double the amount of knights. We'll go into that in a future video, but basically we have a much better military than they do, and we also have allies that we can call if we really need them. So we're not actually going to declare this war. I'm going to very quickly show you how to do a claim, even though I did mention it in a previous video. It's kind of an important topic, so I'm just going to repeat it very quickly here. If we wanted this claim for ourselves, we would basically go into our council tab here and we would consult our bishop. We would use the fabricate claim on county and we would select the county of Alec, and then we get this little icon here which indicates progress. And if I very quickly speed up the game to speed 5 and we allow the progress to actually tick through, this would depend on the speed or the skill level of your actual bishop. Ours isn't very good, so it's taking a bit of a while. But when that reaches 100%, we will actually get a... Let's just ignore this. We will actually get a claim generated. Ignore this too. There we go. So now the claim is fired. Ignore all of this horrible graphical thing. It's because I'm in debug mode. All that's missing is one little bribe. So you can see this is a really easy way for us to create that reason for the war. You can't just march troops anywhere that you like. You need to have a casus belli in order to actually give you a reason to actually start that war, like I've mentioned in a previous video. So I'm just going to click see it done here. We'll lose 105 gold, but if we press F1, we can see we now have a claim ourself on the earldom of Alec, and that means that we can now actually go ahead and declare war, and I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to select Alec again. Bear in mind we can't declare for these holdings separately, so if I right click on the mayor here and click declare war, it says use casus belli to declare on Earl Aid. Again, in a previous video we mentioned how feudal hierarchy works. This mayor is protected by this earl. From a feudal perspective, he's promised protection from this guy, so we can only ever declare on the top level. That's important because if you're trying to get some territory, let's say you wanted to declare for one of the counties like Shropshire in England, then you might be confused if you haven't watched my previous video as to why you need to actually declare war on the King of England itself. So obviously don't do that. You'll end up fighting somebody much bigger than yourself, but just declaring against Alec should be relatively easy, although I do know that there is going to be a problem here, and I'm going to show you that right now. It's kind of relevant. If we click on my claim, this is the same as what we saw when we clicked on this previous guy, and we can expand it and see that we would get it ourselves. In fact, we see that Earl Aid would become our vassal, providing he's still alive. We can see that he's still vastly inferior, but if I hover over declare war, I currently can't declare war because I have disgraced myself, because I didn't honour a call to an alliance for the King of Norway. When you start the game in 1066, as this start actually is, he is at war with England, and when he called me in, I clicked no because I was just creating this video for ease of use, forgetting that that would then hit my prestige and tank me into a disgrace, which would prevent me from declaring war. So honour your alliances and you won't have the same problem as me, but fortunately we are actually in debug mode, so we can just cheat and get some extra prestige, and that will solve our problem for us. So I'm just going to right click on this guy again, go back to declare war. We're going to use my claim and we're going to hit declare war, and we are now at war with Earl Aid, and you can hear the funky music that plays when you declare war in this game. So, the first thing to notice, that now that we've actually declared war, is that we have this raise all armies button at the bottom of the screen, and we also have this icon that appears that just kind of lets us know how the war is going. If I click on that, you can see it shows us that it's the Munster claim on the Earldom of Ailic, which just basically means we've declared this war. It kind of lets you know. The attacker is always on the left and the defender is always on the right, or at least I believe it is. It shows you the relevant portraits of who is actually at war. And the number of soldiers that are currently involved, any allies. We haven't actually called our ally into this war, and we really don't need to. We have 430 troops total of high quality versus this poor guy and his 325 levy that are only of a decent quality, so we should absolutely be able to crush him. So you can see here that we have the option to surrender straight away. We're not going to do that. That's a terrible idea. We can also declare a white peace. Or we can enforce demands. Now, right now, you can see he would accept a white peace, and he would obviously, of course, accept our surrender, but he won't accept enforcing our demands, because why should he? We've declared this war on him, but right now, nothing has happened at all. So, we could click raise armies here, or we could click on the military tab and we could raise armies from up here. There are actually ways that you can use rally points to kind of change how you raise all of these. I'm going to discuss that in a future video. For now, like I said, this is the 900 mile an hour edition of this video. I'm just going to very quickly show you, how war works. So for now, let's just go back down here and hit this raise all armies button. You can see that it's raising our armies at the one and only rally point that we currently have, and that's in our capital. Generally, that's where your rally point will be defaulted to. So if you want to change that, you can actually do that through here. You can select this plus button here and select where your rally points want to be. But like I said, we'll go through that in a future video. Then we're going to need to, I'm going to slow down the game to speed 3, and we're going to need to press spacebar to unpause, because we needed to wait. I'm going to pause again for a few days to go by for our levy to actually raise. You notice they started with about 10 troops, which was our knights, I believe. It's defaulted to using ourself as the commander, and that just so happens to be because we're the best commander in our realm right now. We've got a pretty good marshal of 21, and we've also got a prowess of 13, so we're actually a pretty good guy to lead this army. So I'm going to leave that as it is. Now, if you were prosecuting a much larger war than this, you might want to actually split your army up. So if I select my levy here, I could press this button here to split off new army, and then that gives me the option to kind of select which forces I want to move over. So I can select this one and this one and this one. I'm actually going to close that and not... Oh, well, I've actually done the split. You can't cancel it by doing that. But you could split your army and then appoint a different commander, and then that would give you more tactical options if you were assaulting multiple places. Right now, this is a tiny guy that we're taking on, so I'm actually going to box select my army, and I'm going to click this merge all armies button here, because it makes sense to actually put all of our troops together in this scenario. We will talk in future videos about when it makes sense to split. But for right now, we're all good for supply. We're not suffering any attrition. And we've got a really good commander. So all is well. I'm going to select my army, and I'm going to right click up here in our territory, because I suspect what's going to happen is they're going to raise their levy and probably march into our lands. So let's unpause the game and see what happens. In fact, there we are. They're immediately marching into our lands. So as we march up there, a couple of things to point out to you. In fact, let's pause the game and point it out just so that we don't end up with the game running away with it. So our army shows us the number of troops that are currently involved in our army, as well as this little set of icons here is the quality of our army. If you hover in the top right, you can see the total number of soldiers that you have, but you can also see this quality icon right at the bottom that tells us that we're at high quality. And like I said, it's the numbers of your troops on the left hand side and then the quality on the right. If we look at our enemy's army, it's the quality of their troops first, then it's the number of their troops second, and then it's their crest last. So this is how you actually know that they're an enemy army as opposed to an ally. An ally will appear similar to yourself, whereas an enemy army will appear in this kind of format. Notice they have this little icon here. That means they're suffering attrition. We'll go into a future video about what causes attrition, but for right now it's because they're in our territory as opposed to their own territory, and so they're suffering a little bit of damage just because they're marching away from home and they're having to live off the land. Let's place it that way. We're going to unpause the video. I will speed it up ever so slightly. Right now we're getting this little icon here that tells us we will win decisively. From a really too long didn't read perspective, as long as you're getting this icon, you'll be fine. Notice it tells us the reasons as to why we're going to win. We've got higher quality, more soldiers, better army commander. It does say defending in hills, which is quite interesting because we're actually the attacker. I think the defending in hills should actually be applied to these guys right now. But yeah, this gives you a quick kind of overview of whether or not you're going to win, and it's useful to know. So if I click on the siege here, it actually tells us how long the siege is going to be going on for, and then the siege events that are contributing towards that. Again, we're going to break this down much more in detail in a future video, but for now, when you're sieging a province or being sieged, this is how far the siege has gone. When this bar reaches the right-hand side, the siege is over and the attackers will win. You need to have more troops in your sieging army than the garrison that is actually in the place that's being sieged. Generally speaking, I think I mentioned, or I may have mentioned earlier, that there are multiple holdings here. Like there's this city over here that's held by this mayor. In order for us to win, we're going to have to take the barony. We're going to have to take the castles. So you don't need to siege the towns and the bishoprics, but you do need to siege down the defended territory. So we will need to siege down this castle holding here in order to win. But right now we're going to defend our own territory. We're going to break this siege by marching into this army, and it will give us the battle screen. So I'm going to very quickly pause so I can click on this battle. This is the battle screen here that gives you a bunch of breakdown. Now again, we're going to go in a future video where we go more into detail, but very quickly you can see on the left hand side there's the defender, which is us. Oh, in fact, yes, that's why it's mentioning defender, because we've actually got troops here. So the defender is us, and you can see that we've got a massive commander advantage just because our dude is really cool. And on the right hand side we can see that their commander advantage is 14. So we outmatch them for commander advantage, so we're going to generally have an advantage in the middle here that shows that everything's in our favor. Again, if you hover over all of these things, it will actually give you a breakdown of why you're getting these stats. Because we've got such a good commander and we've got the numerical advantage here and we're defending in hills, we're largely just going to smash this guy into smithereens. In fact, I'm just going to unpause and that's going to happen on speed 3. And there we go. There we go. Our forces actually took Earl Aid's kinsman, Domhnall, hostage after capturing him in the Battle of Breffni. Now, that's very important. So we're going to very quickly talk about that. By clicking on the thing that I mentioned earlier, which gives us a breakdown of how we're currently doing in the war, you're going to see what our war score currently is. Now, we've already achieved a 50% war score for winning that battle so decisively. We have wiped out their entire army, so we get a massive 50% war score from that. If their army was larger, it would have retreated as opposed to have been wiped out. Or if it had a different composition, it may well have retreated. And because it didn't retreat and we wiped it out, we got a pretty good war score out of it. Likewise, we actually captured one of his family members, and because we captured his heir, we've actually got a 50% war score just from that. So sometimes picking your fights to win a war makes sense. If you can fight the actual leader, you will instantly win the war. Or if you can capture somebody important, you can win the war too. And we'll probably go into that more in future videos, but for now, be aware that actually leading the armies yourself can be quite dangerous. If we lost the battle and my leader was captured, it would give the enemy a 100% war score, which means they would immediately be able to enforce their demands. So we would instantly lose the war. So be very careful about using your liege to actually lead your armies. It's fine when they're an absolute powerhouse and when they have a numerical advantage, but just be careful about the kind of fights that you're putting them into. Likewise, in this scenario, he led his army with an heir, and we ended up, kicking that guy's head in and taking him prisoner, and that would allow us to actually immediately make peace. I'm not going to make peace right now. I'm going to march into their lands just to show you that I'm going to siege down his territory. It's not going to take very long because I'm going to speed up the game speed 5. You can see all of these siege events are firing. Right now it's stalemate, so there's no effect. There's 6 months to go. But they're running low on supplies, and you can see each of these events has a contributing factor to us actually finally winning the siege. As it goes on, you can see there is a siege event that's made starvation, and that's giving us now 15% towards siege progress. There's actually a siege event that's happening. So after a tense siege, Chief Sigfus has succeeded in penetrating the fortified settlement and has set his soldiers to pillaging everything of value. In short order, they will have stripped half of Greater Connacht of its wealth. So we can spend prestige or we can avenge the slight, or we can rebuild it. So this is just a siege event. Some siege events are good, some siege events are bad. Just be mindful that they can happen. Again, if you're leading the army, bad things can happen to you. So sometimes discretion is the better part of valor, and keeping yourself out of the fight makes sense. Right now, I'm just going to click we will rebuild. It doesn't really matter. Oh, it's actually over here that the siege event is going on from this raider over here. But I'm going to unpause the game and win. You can see victory has happened. Now, this is immediately fired, and the reason it's immediately fired is because not only did I have 100% war score, but I've also taken the war goal as well. If I click on So Be It, you can see that we've won that war. Now, we would have got the option to enforce demands ordinarily if we hadn't captured that air and we'd instead captured the territory. But as it happens, we've won. That's a successful war. Nothing really else for us to display in this video. That's how wars work in a nutshell. I'm going to be back in a future video, and we're going to drill down into what happened here. We're going to talk all about the stats, and we'll maybe show some different examples where there are much more powerful adversaries and where we actually need to use tactics and strategies to make sure that we win. But for now, that's a really whirlwind overview of how wars work and how you can expand your realm using warfare, and how you can really dominate in Crusader Kings 3. So I thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.